Last week, the government announced that it will accelerate work with states and territories on heavy vehicle road reform and investigate the benefits, costs and potential next steps of options to introduce cost-reflective road pricing for all vehicles. This formed part of the government's response to the Harper Review into competition policy, and particularly its recommendation 3 that, quotes, "Governments should introduce cost-reflective road pricing with the aid of new technologies, with pricing subject to independent oversight and revenues used for road construction, maintenance and safety. Indirect charges and taxes on road users should be reduced as direct pricing is increased." At the outset, I want to highlight an important aspect of this recommendation. It does not involve a call for higher overall charges on road users. On the contrary, the recommendation is that any introduction of direct road pricing should be accompanied by reductions of indirect charges and taxes on road users. The principle of moving towards cost-reflective road pricing is an important one, offering the promise over time of roads which flow more freely and better meet the needs of road users. There has been growing debate in recent years about the need to charge for road use in a fairer, more consistent, logical and efficient fashion than occurs today. A number of participants in that debate expressed their support last week for the direction the Turnbull government has signalled on this issue. Business Council of Australia Chief Executive Jennifer Westacott said that the Business Council welcomes the government's intention to pursue much-needed reform in areas essential for business competitiveness, such as road pricing. Australian Automobile Association Chief Executive Michael Bradley said that the package of economic reforms would provide increased choice and competition for Australian motorists. In particular, he said that the AAA was pleased that the government supported a number of recommendations, including those related to cost-reflective road pricing. Infrastructure Partnerships Australia Chief Executive Brendan Lyon said that the commitment to a process of to reform road user charging is welcome and is in the national interest. Mr Lyon also called for Labor to also welcome this recommendation in due course to allow this issue to move forward. In this regard, it is noteworthy that in a recent article in the Sunday Times, the member for Perth expressed a strong view in favour of the user pays principle for road infrastructure. The policy direction recommended by the Harper Review is broadly consistent with other policy reviews over the last few years. In 2010, the then Treasurer received the report of a comprehensive study into Australia's future tax system, known as the Henry Review. This contained a recommendation that, in time, fuel and vehicle registration charges should be abolished on the basis that they were replaced by more efficient road user charges. Last year, the Productivity Commission reported on its study into the funding and financing of public infrastructure and recommended that, quotes, "well-designed user charges should be used to the fullest extent that can be economically justified." Close quotes. The Commission argued that, quotes, "significant institutional and longer-term road pricing arrangements will create more direct links to road users, taking advantage of advances in vehicle technology." Close quotes. Infrastructure Australia commented on this issue when it released its infrastructure audit earlier this year. Quotes, "Over recent years, rates of public and private investment in infrastructure have been higher than the long-term average. The current level of funding is unsustainable in the face of increasing budget pressure. Current arrangements represent the most significant opportunity for public policy reform in Australia's infrastructure sectors. The country needs to consider a broader system of transport pricing for both road and public transport." Close quotes. It is useful to briefly review some of the main arguments that are put for a transition to a road pricing approach. The first is that our current system for funding roads is under growing pressure. Roads are funded out of general government revenue by all three levels of government, and the total amount spent each year nationally happens to be broadly in line with what governments receive each year through registration and other charges at state level and fuel excise tax at federal level. However, the required amount of road spending is likely to rise, and at the same time, longer-term trends such as more fuel-efficient vehicles and the rise of electric vehicles means that the fuel excise revenue stream may not be sufficient to meet the required amount of spending. A second argument is that a well-designed road pricing system has the potential to make the provision of roads more responsive to what road users want, because the supply of new road capacity would be responsive to market signals. In addition, there would likely be new options for financing new roads out of the revenue stream that the new road would generate. A third factor is that until relatively recently, it was a complex task to determine the number of kilometres a vehicle had travelled and to levy a suitable charge. Advances in technology now make it much easier and cheaper to determine this, for example through the use of GPS-based telematics devices in a vehicle which capture data and report it over a network. This can be data not just about distance travelled, but also on other variables such as fuel usage, the vehicle's weight, the particular route travelled and so on, which, for example, could potentially allow for different rates to be charged for roads of different quality standards. Of course, it will be important to maintain confidentiality and privacy safeguards, and this is an issue that will need to be worked through very carefully. The Turnbull Government will work closely with state and territory governments to progress work on fairer, more efficient pricing that is cost reflective. We are also willing to consider payments to states and territories for reforms that improve productivity and lead to economic growth in order to encourage action. A principle of these payments is that they should be made on the basis of actual implementation of reforms. In progressing our response to this recommendation of the Harper Review, the Government will build on significant work underway around Australia. For example, there is work being done on heavy vehicle pricing under the oversight of the Transport and Infrastructure Council of Federal, State and Territory Transport Ministers. We will continue consultations with the states and territories on ways to promote efficient investment in and usage of roads in line with other infrastructure sectors, focusing on ensuring road infrastructure services best and most effectively meet the needs of users. The next step will be to report to COAG, including on steps to transition to independent heavy vehicle price regulation by 2017-18. This independent and transparent pricing will be a key component of the reforms in order to provide the fairness sought by industry. Australian Trucking Association Chief Executive Christopher Mellon said last week that the introduction of cost-reflective pricing must include the establishment of an independent economic regulator to set fair, enforceable prices for road users. We are already taking tangible steps on heavy vehicle pricing. In South Australia, the Commonwealth and South Australian governments have agreed to establish a joint working group to oversee a simulation charge trial that will test the logic, fairness and structure of alternative road user charging. The trial will go some way towards collecting the necessary data to consider how existing truck revenue can be collected more fairly and invested more efficiently in our transport network. The Turnbull Government is also working with the Western Australian Government in relation to the proposed Perth Freight Link, which will deliver cost savings for the freight industry through time savings and reduced vehicle operating costs. The project would represent the first time a heavy vehicle charge would be applied on a specific route in Western Australia to assist in building a road, and the first time GPS-based technology would be adopted for distance-based user charging purposes. There are going to be a number of complex issues government will need to work through. One, as I mentioned earlier, is confidentiality and privacy issues. The second issue is getting a better understanding of the way that road users in both heavy vehicles and other vehicles such as cars would change their road user behaviour, if at all, in the face of a move to distance-based pricing. The proposed heavy vehicle trial in South Australia, which I mentioned earlier, is expected to generate useful data in this regard. Another trial is being conducted by motorway company Transurban in Melbourne. The Transurban road usage study involves a significant number of volunteer road users and covers the Melbourne Metro road network. The trial will provide valuable insights into how road users change their behaviour under three charging scenarios: a per kilometre charge, a one-off charge based on anticipated travel, and a per-trip or access charge. A third issue is addressing the specific needs of the trucking industry, particularly as we have identified heavy vehicle road reform as an initial priority. The government understands that there are a range of views held in the trucking industry, and we will certainly be consulting closely with the industry. A fourth important issue is the equity implications of the greater use of road pricing. In considering this issue, the Australian Government expects to give careful thought to community service obligations, service level standards and how best to structure charges across road networks. There is still a lot of work to do on understanding what impacts road pricing would have on all users of the road system and the broader economy. We will need to be satisfied that there is a reasonable degree of community acceptance and understanding. In turn, this will require a demonstration that the benefits from a broader use of road pricing would exceed the costs. Any change to the current system of road funding must improve transparency and deliver clear community benefits. We will continue to work with the states and territories through the COAG process and with industry and the community to ensure we get this right. There is a considerable amount of work in front of the Australian Government and state and territory governments on this important issue. But it is a reform direction which holds significant promise, and that is why the Turnbull Government has clearly indicated the path we intend to pursue on this issue. I present a copy of my ministerial statement.
I thank the Minister.